Hi everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a book review, and that book review is going to be for Dear Wendy by Zhao. This was definitely one of my most anticipated books of this year. One, because I just love this stunning cover. When I talk about liking illustrated covers, this is what I enjoy. But also because this is a coming of age story about two people who are in college. Both of them are asexual, and it's dealing with that, but also becoming friends, and I'm always looking for a new aroace story, so yes, I was very excited to read this, and I have some thoughts about it because unfortunately it did not live up to my great expectations for this novel. So first off, I want to say I gave this a 3.5 stars, so I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it. It's definitely not my favorite book of the year, which I was kind of hoping it would be, and I want to say that is in part due to the fact that I think I am finally growing out of YA. There's just some instances where books still hit me pretty hard, even though they're for this demographic. But I would say the majority of the time YA books are definitely for a younger reader, and they don't appeal to me as much as an almost 30-year-old person, which is totally fine. Those parts of the book I think I acknowledge and didn't dock points for in my review, but there are a lot of structural things that I think ended up me not liking this book as much and made me give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So going into this review, I would recommend this. I would definitely recommend it towards that teen college age demographic. I can see a younger version of myself really enjoying this story and really finding acceptance and happiness reading this, because getting to see your representation in a book is really important, but where I'm at now, it doesn't really quite work for me. So what is this book about besides being a young adult contemporary novel coming of age story? So in this book we have Sophie and Zhao, and they are both first years at, I believe, Wesley University, which is a university outside of Boston, which is an all-female college. And so it has a very particular kind of culture to it. And so as first years, Sophie has started this Instagram where she basically acts as a Dear Wendy type character, where she is giving advice to the other students at this college. She's a very type A, very passionate, very perfectionist kind of personality, and as a joke, Jo also starts her own persona on Instagram, giving her own relationship advice. Relationship advice is a little bit more jokey, a little bit more humorous at the beginning, where they are basically like, just break up, blah blah blah, this drama is stupid kind of a thing. So Jo is the more relaxed character, the more easygoing one, the one who doesn't think you should take everything so seriously all the time. And so online, because they don't know each other's personas, Jo and Sophie begin to clash with each other. But in their school life, Jo and Sophie are meeting for the first time, and they're really connecting because Jo and Sophie are aroace, and they are connecting on this level, discovering each other's shared identity. For trigger warnings, content warnings, this book is going to include arophobia, acephobia, as well as just general homophobia. I don't believe there's any direct transphobia, but definitely stuff that skirts the line on there. And then the biggest one is going to be online bullying and harassment. The main characters kind of acknowledge when they get out of hand with stuff, and they don't really cross the line too much. It is other people that are coming into the situation and doing that bullying. Besides that, this book is a lot of like messy friendship drama. There's a little bit of not being accepted by family members and just some kind of clashing family dynamics, but for the most part it is a friendship story. You could probably call it a QPR, but it's this queer platonic relationship, friendship that is forming between Jo and Sophie that is really the heart of this story. So it just has a lot of the things that I look for in a young adult novel. It's coming of age, it's about queer identities. I especially am looking for YA stories set in college. I think that's really important. And for the most part, I liked what those things added to the story. I liked being set in college. I liked the coming of age nature. But for me, the strongest point of this novel was definitely that it was both Jo and Sophie. I really liked getting to see two people with the same identity who have very different personalities. A lot of times, especially in ace-centered books, if the main character is ace, we get a very shy, reserved, very online kind of character, and Sophie fits into that mold a little bit, but she also kind of fluctuates out of that a little bit. She's pretty bubbly, pretty happy, but I think this book really did succeed in having both Jo and Sophie to kind of foil each other, to show people with the same identity who have very different personalities, to get kind of a little bit of a different perspective from both of them. But I will say there is not a wide range of the asexual, aromantic spectrum. Sophie and Jo are very much on the sexually repulsed, romantically repulsed side of things, and I would say their feelings are almost entirely similar. And I loved that they got to connect with each other and that they shared that, but again, it is kind of limiting because it's kind of only showing one very specific example of the aroace rep. But having Zhao and Sophie worked in the story not just because they had those contrasting personalities, because we're switching POVs, it gave a lot of movement to the story in a book that otherwise didn't have like a ton of plot beats. And they just really balanced each other out narratively, because Sophie in particular I feel like could come off as a little bit annoying because of her personality, so getting to switch between the two different personalities really helped to not feel bored of one person. And again, they created a lot of really interesting contrasts between each other. So where did I end up having problems with this book where I didn't love it as much as I was kind of hoping for? So on paper, it seems like this book has a lot of plot beats, a lot going on. So both Zhao and Sophie, are not friends with each other at this point in the semester. So they both have their own little friendship groups, which are mainly comprised of their roommates. So Zhao has 2 roommates, and then Sophie, I believe, also has 2 roommates. So they have these separate friend groups, and both Zhao and Sophie are dealing with their own things in each of the friend groups, but more so with Sophie, whose parents don't believe in her asexual, aromantic identity. Both of them are also struggling with identity stuff, but I would say more so on Zhau's side, where she is dealing with some gender stuff, as well as is not as comfortable with her asexual aromanticism just because she feels like she's going to be left alone. Both of them are also dealing with their online personas that are beefing with each other and also trying to keep up with that presence online. And then the third act kind of conflict comes in the form of people that are harassing and bullying them because of their asexual aromanticism, giving relationship advice. Both of them have kind of past dramas with high school relationships. Both of them have like hobbies and different classes and stuff that they're dealing with. And then on top of this, they are trying to start an asexual aromantic club for their members of campus and kind of, discuss different issues that come up with the identity. So on paper, it sounds like there's a lot. There's 2 separate characters that are dealing with a lot of different things in their friendship relationship, and they're also coming together as a pair and dealing with their own new friendship dynamic and relationship drama because of that and their online personas. But in the book itself, it didn't really feel like there was a lot going on, and I think that was one due to pacing, but the biggest factor is what the book chose to focus on. We spent a lot of time with Sophie and Zhao just kind of hanging out with each other and discussing their identity. We spent a lot of time in the asexual aromantic club, again having just these lengthy dialogues discussing different stuff about the identities. And it's hard because those conversations feel really true to life, especially college life, where for the first time you might be really okay with your identity and being surrounded by a lot more people that have your same identity. So I understand, but kind of reading just like people discussing different identity stuff or like dealing with sexuality and stuff, it's not the most interesting to read, especially when you're someone older like me who has read about this online at length, people on Tumblr discussing these things and having these kind of same jokes and everything like that, and who have discussed it with real friends in real life. So like if you're a younger reader going into this book, I could see where it would be so relatable, it would be so heartwarming. But like as a seasoned person who has been in online LGBTQ spaces, a lot of these conversations felt like I was reading Tumblr posts, felt like I was watching old recycled TikToks that again I have seen a bazillion times, those points discussed on Tumblr and elsewhere. Conversations were true to life. Like definitely this age of person, like 18, 19-year-olds are definitely talking and discussing like this, but it did definitely feel very Tumblr-esque, and some of these jokes, honestly, I would love to hear a younger person's perspective on them because they felt very millennial humor to me. It just felt like a lot of the on-page screen time was really just on really superfluous things, and like again, it was so heartwarming to see Zhao and Sophie connecting, to see them being able to find someone that they can finally find a commonality with and really discuss their identities with in real life. At a certain point that turns from heartwarming and it just becomes not really interesting as a story beat. For me, what was really interesting for this story in particular, the most interesting beats was what initially drew these characters into conflict with each other, which is their online personas. And while that is a little bit of the book, I would say the online stuff is more relegated to the sidelines. It's not as important, which is unfortunate because that's where all the interesting like back and forth character banter for Zhao and Sophie was really coming from, because they were getting along so well in real life. I think there was a couple couple issues with the pacing of this novel. Just a lot of coming of age, college age, kind of contemporary stories like this, especially LGBT stories, they really want to be this slice of life type of story. And it's a lot harder to perfect that than I think people give it credit for. It's hard to make a kind of slice of life story interesting. And so here on paper, there's a lot going on between the different friendships and the different relationships, the different online personas, but maybe it was too much going on without really focusing in on the really interesting points. And so what became the focus was these like kind of superfluous moments where these characters were just hanging out with each other and just talking, which honestly is just not very enjoyable to read if something is not being revealed or happening. Like, if I reread this book, I could take a shot every time Sophie and Joe looked at each other and started laughing, or if Joe and Sophie looked at another character and just started laughing with how relatable things were. There were so many like scenes or lines that ended like that, like, you know, having this like cute little friendship moment and then looking and I laughed at her and we laughed together. Like I could be drunk if I did that while reading this book. That kind of speaks to me about like where the focus really struggled in with this story. To me, the most interesting point of the story, the point that I really, really loved, was Joe struggling with her identity. Now, personally, I really liked having Sophie as a contrast to Joe because she is really set in her identity. She is not going to be persuaded in any way or anything, whereas Joe is a little bit more hesitant in her identity, and that's because she's really struggling with the idea that she might be alone, that she's not going to have this one other person. Joe is really struggling in a heterosexual monogamous society where everybody views romantic relationships as the most important relationship in anybody's life. And so Joe takes this out on her friends a little bit, and she's like scared to get close to people, but she also just really doesn't want her friends to date and just like is really disturbed by the idea of her friends dating because it has caused problems for her in the past, and she's really worried about losing her friends and just not becoming important anymore in someone's life. And for me, that was like one of the most realistic examples of asexual, aromantic identity that I've ever seen, and it's like an actual issue that I and other people have dealt with, like this internal feeling of just like a little bit of spite towards people, and also just spite with like society, because society views romantic relationships as the most important thing, and because of that, it really makes people that are on the asexual, aromantic side feel really left out when they don't want that or don't view that as the most important thing in their lives, and just feeling like they're not getting the attention back in friendships that they are in. That felt so real and just so visceral, and for me, that was Jo's story. That is what her whole like thing should have focused on. She should have been a lot more hesitant about becoming close. Sophie, even though, you know, they were both asexual, aromantic, I think if that is what her internal journey was really focused on, and really coming to terms with how to make compromises in relationships and how to kind of get out of her codependency on like having a relationship partner or a friendship partner, like that would have made a story. That would have made a really good character growth for Jo. But again, there were just a lot of other factors that really didn't play into the story at large that kind of took the focus away from that, which is really unfortunate because that was like the most relatable, beautiful, heart-wrenching moment, because it is just like, it's surrounded in nasty thought, obviously, but it's so real, and that is like a real thing that some asexual, aromantic people deal with, and so it would have been a lot more powerful to have that as the relationship focus. And for Sophie, again, she is a character that is really on top of things. She's really a perfectionist, so her career life is really working, her friendships are working a little bit better, her relationship with her family is a little bit tense. That could have been a place to grow and potentially made a really beautiful character growth moment for her. But I think the other thing is that Sophie takes her online persona really, really seriously, and she really views it as important, giving good advice to people, relationship advice to people. She doesn't know what she wants to do yet in life. I think she would lean towards like counseling or psychology. That seems to be where she's headed. So to me, that is the more obvious point where she could go and have that as a focus of her story, her revealing what she wants to do in life. But there also could have been a story beat maybe about her being this like online persona as more important than her in real life friendships. I think that was a little bit of a point, like where she wasn't as close with her friends as she needed to be, or where she wasn't paying attention to them as much. That might have been Zhao, honestly, but that could have been an area to focus on for her. Sophie especially felt like she was lacking some kind of big character moment, big character journey. And I think because this book also is so heavily emphasis on two aromantic asexual people becoming friends with each other, and it is so focused on a sex repulsed, romantic repulsed two people becoming friends with each other, I think this book was really a little bit nervous about pinning them together and making them a queer platonic relationship, even though it kind of hints at that that's what they want for the future with each other, is like buying a house or an apartment with each other and just like becoming best buddies and roommates. Again, I think this book was a little bit scared to do that because it didn't want to pin the idea of like two people in like a monogamous relationship with the idea of asexuality, because it becomes really complicated, because people are like, you know, people would point to that and be like, oh, but you do have that relationship, like, you know. So I get it. As an author, I get that, but also I would have liked it to lean a little bit more into the queer platonic relationship side, a little bit more into the conflict between these two characters coming together. Like, it's nice that the kind of third act conflict was kind of viewed as stupid by the characters and they kind of make up pretty easily with each other. There was a levity to that, but also like there was no conflict between these characters. They didn't have enough building to make this relationship seem like important or worth fighting for, to make this connection seem like it was so important outside of identity. So there was just a lot of work that needed to go into this book for me to personally really find it perfect. And I think for me, it again really boils down to focus. This book had a lot of thumbs in a lot of different things, and I think because of the slice of life nature it decided to go in, it was really not willing to focus on one story beat for both of the characters kind of growing into themselves. Those internal stories were really sidelined for just, again, having like Tumblr discussions about identity, which is important, but ultimately did make the book feel a little bit more juvenile. So in the end, what do I think about Dear Wendy? It was sweet. There was a lot of joy in this story. Again, I think having two perspectives really created a really great dynamic, a really great foil between the different lives we were seeing. And this is a coming of age story I would recommend to people, but unfortunately there were a lot of things that didn't work for me personally. I'm just like, yeah, this is good, but I'm waiting for great, you know? It's that kind of a deal. So that is my review of Dear Wendy by Zhao. I'm looking forward to what this author will write in the future. At this point, I'm like, you know what? You got your quintessential coming of age aroace identity story out of the way. Now it's time to make some really amazing stories that happen to have asexual characters, aromantic characters at the front of them. I'm excited for that because I feel like this author, you know, she's only going to go up from here. This was a really good start. There was a lot of good stuff in this. Again, it is a book I would recommend, but there's more greatness to come, and I feel like she is going to learn a lot from this first book and get better as time goes.